That's good. I tried to brush up on my Portuguese, but it was a failure. So I'm glad everyone speaks English. Thanks so much for having me. This is a real honor to be able to speak with you at your conference. I looked online at the website and all the different offerings in the course, and it's very impressive, and it's really an honor to be able to present alongside all these other great presenters. And thanks so much to Daniel. I don't know if you guys know how great he is, but we love him in the United States. We think he's amazing, and it's really, I'm very grateful that he invited me to speak today. So he asked that I talk about learning theory as it relates to social media. And as a bit of background, I'm the vice chair of education in the Department of Emergency Medicine at Stanford. My role is to support a variety of educational program directors at the medical, student, resident, and faculty levels, and I do primarily education research. So I think that's why I was invited to speak with you today. I think I was also invited to speak with you because I love social media, and I love using it as a tool for teaching and learning, and that's really what I hope to get across in our time together today. Are we still on? I don't see you guys anymore. Yes. Okay, we've got a yes. All right. So I'm just gonna get into the talk because now I don't see the audience. So I'm assuming that it's going well, and we'll just keep going. So I do love social media, and for that reason, anybody in the room who loves social media, please tweet during this conference. I'd love to see your thoughts about what we discussed today, as well as any questions you might have. You can follow me at Mike Gisandi, and then my department is at Stanford Emergency Medicine, at Stanford eMed. And here is Stanford. Stanford is a beautiful campus in Northern California. If any of you have the opportunity to visit California, I work just about a kilometer from the center of campus, which is this beautiful church where I got married. And it's really a remarkable large campus that houses not just a medical school, but a number of other colleges, including law and engineering, general humanities, education as well. And we sit just south of San Francisco in the heart of Silicon Valley. So if we're going to be talking about social media today, just so you understand my proximity, I'm about 10 kilometers, and I had to look up how long a kilometer was, by the way, 10 kilometers from Facebook, 20 kilometers from Google, and 30 kilometers from Apple. So I sit right in the center of the tech hub of the United States, and because of that, we certainly have a lot of influence, both from technology, but certainly from social media in specific, as we consider how to best teach our students. Here's a picture of our hospital. This is a new building that will be opening next fall. And for those of you interested in emergency medicine, we have a long and storied history of training future emergency physicians. We have a large department with 80 faculty members. We have a residency program that's after medical school, 4 years. And then for those who want to subspecialize in a specific area of emergency medicine or research, we have 11 fellowship programs. And then most importantly, we have a wonderful international conference that we host every year on one of the Hawaiian Islands. And I realize my slide is old from last year, but we're going to be on Maui this year in the middle of April. So if anybody wants to come join us in Maui, we would love to meet with you in person. So here are the objectives for my lecture. They're really just two. The first is to talk to you a little bit about why I think social media is a wonderful tool for educating physicians. And I hope through some of the examples I'll share in this lecture, you'll get a sense of why I'm so passionate about using it as a teaching tool. And then we're going to talk about what Daniel asked me to talk about, which is learning theory. We're going to talk in specific about 3 learning theories that I think validate the use of social media as an educational tool in medicine. Constructivist learning theory, the idea of a community of practice, and social development theory. But before launching into a discussion about learning theory, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I use social media, and I hope that example will make the discussion of learning theory a little bit easier to understand. Now, if I could have an aspirational goal, though, that would be to inspire you. I was inspired at a very similar lecture about social media in 2014. And that lecture was given by Michelle Lin. She's the editor in chief of Academic Life and Emergency Medicine, a blog which is abbreviated ALIEM, ALIEM.com. And she's a professor at the University of California, San Francisco. And I was at a specialty meeting of the Society for Academic Emergency Medicine in 2014 in Dallas. And I'll tell you the story. It was the end of the day. I'm at a medical conference. I'm kind of tired. I'm thinking about going to the pool and not really learning anything. And I look at the schedule and I see Michelle. And Michelle was one of my old faculty members when I was a resident back in the 1900s. And I saw that she had a talk called From Twitter to Tenure. And I had never been on any social media site of any kind. I will tell you, I've never been on Facebook. Shocking. I work 10 kilometers from Facebook. I've never had a Facebook account. And I'd never used Twitter and the others. But I saw this talk, and I thought, well, I want tenure, so I should join Twitter, right? So I go to the conference, and I listen to her make a very cogent argument for how she is able to reach a much broader audience of learners, frankly, from all around the world, by teaching online. And I work at a very traditional university. I was at the time at Northwestern in Chicago, another very traditional American university, where impact and the demonstration of impact as an educator around the world is really a requisite for getting promoted to full professor. The concept of tenure really just doesn't exist for physicians in the United States anymore. But we all certainly want to demonstrate our impact, and we want to get promoted. And I thought, well, I teach in traditional lecture halls like the one you're sitting in right now, and I teach small groups and I write papers, but what impact am I really having? Can I get my message to a broader audience if I use some of the tools that Dr. Lin is describing? And this is in 2014. So I decided at the end of the hour, I'm going to join Twitter, and then I'm going to offer my services editorial team for Alien. And from there, I feel like my use of social media as a tool, as an educator, really launched. And I'll share some of the examples of what we've been doing with Allium and the use of social media as we go through the talk. But that's sort of where it started. So I assume that some of you in the audience use social media all the time. You're following pop culture. I think there's probably some of you in the audience who think social media is ridiculous, and it's going to be a hard sell for me to get you to use it as a tool to teach. And then there's probably some of you in the middle who thought, well, I've never considered using social media to get my message out as a physician educator, but let me learn more. You're the ones I'm trying to talk to today. So as we do that, let's define some terms. I think we need to agree on the terms we're going to use as we talk about them today. And the first we're going to talk about is obviously social media. So a very simple definition is on the screen. These are tools that are on your computer. That's pretty easy, or on your phone. They allow you to create content and then share that content, specifically ideas, informations, and interests. And the interests matter, right? When we're talking about teaching, we're teaching to learners who have a specific learning need or interest in this case. And it's done so in a virtual community. So we're in a digital world. We're not sitting in a lecture hall like you are right now. And that virtual community, that network of learners and teachers, can interact with one another, ideas, and advance knowledge. And I would argue that in the last 5 or 6 years, that community that's occurred online in the digital space is advancing medicine. It is advancing the knowledge of human health and science in ways that traditional textbooks and journal articles did at a snail's pace. We are translating knowledge created in the lab to the bedside in a much, much faster rate because we're able to share information with one another. So if you're one of the Luddites in the room who really just don't believe in social media, but you're going to give it a try after this wonderful day of lectures Daniel has created for you, you may look at all of these different social media apps and think, gosh, this is overwhelming. I don't even know where to start. And that's sort of how I felt. Some of the icons on your screen are computer companies that have come and gone in the Silicon Valley. Some others have become very dominant in their space. And I hope that you don't get overwhelmed, but instead realize that all of these different apps are just tools. They're simply tools. Think about when you go to fix some boards on your porch. And sometimes you have to nail the boards in, and sometimes you're going to use a screwdriver. And if you have a screw that you're going to screw in, you wouldn't take the hammer, you would take the screwdriver, right? You simply use tools to fix problems. And as I realized this, I started to think, well, all right, if I have a problem with my learners, if I have a problem teaching something, if I have a problem getting my message to go around the world in the ways that I want it to, I need to choose a platform to get specific messages out. Sometimes I use Twitter. I probably put 2 or 3 things on Twitter every day, of which maybe 1 or 2 really relate to medicine, where I'm in teacher mode, where I am an instructor and I want to share whatever knowledge I have, generally about medical education, sometimes about emergency medicine. At other times, I want to have a longer platform, and I'll choose to blog, right? So I use a blog site. I blog for several different organizations, including Allium and the International Clinician Educators blog. I had a blog come out just this morning, and that allows me to kind of get a longer concept or idea out to a wider audience. Using International Clinician Educators blog as an example, this is a blog for medical educators, generally in English-speaking countries around the world. It has about 5,000 people who subscribe to it on a daily basis, and when posts get put up online, they're retweeted or put into different social media platforms with a reach of another 10,000 people within about a week. So I can communicate to 15,000 other educators around the world my short idea, generally 500 to 1,000 words, but something that I want to say to that audience. And if I tried to write that in a traditional journal article, it would take months and months and months to write it. I would have to send it to the journal editors. They would consider rejecting it. They would send it back to me, perhaps with revisions. If I was lucky, those revisions would take many, many weeks to prepare. It would go back in, and then it would sit waiting to get put into the print issue for many more months. It could take a year to 18 months to get my idea out to an audience. And then how do I know those 15,000 people are going to read my article? They probably aren't, right? But if it pops up on their phone while they're drinking coffee, wow, I certainly have disseminated my ideas. So just as an example, I pick different tools when I want to teach to different learner groups, and I hope that you would do the same. You just experiment with things available to you, generally for free in the App Store, and figure out, how could I use Snapchat to teach? How could I use Twitter to teach? How could I use Google Plus to teach? And put yourself out there as an educator and try to just teach the world a few important things, a few ideas that you have, particularly around the application and integration of the knowledge you're getting as a student or a junior faculty member. That's really what the world wants to see. It's not facts and data, but how you use those facts and data, the why behind the what that makes social media as a tool for teaching and learning so powerful. So if I say that social media is used as a tool to fix problems, let's talk about one problem that I had to fix. So when I started working with academic life and emergency medicine, we recognized that we needed to provide a platform for a specific type of learner group that had been ignored in the United States, and that's chief residents. So just to talk a little bit about how you become a doctor in the United States, after high school or secondary school, you have 4 years of college, and then you have 4 years of medical school, and then you do residency that can last anywhere between 3 and 7 years, depending upon your specialty. And then if you subspecialize, you may choose to do fellowship for another 1 to 3 years. At the end of residency, in that final year, the faculty members will often designate 1 or 2 of the best residents to be chief residents. And I don't know if you have chief residents where you train, but this is the concept. And those 1 or 2 residents become sort of the resident leaders and educators for the entire residency program. They work both as residents and as faculty members, and it's often a training position to become faculty at that particular site or another medical school. Now, when you think about chief residents, though, they are 1 or 2 individuals at a specific program. They have very little, if any, community with all of the other chief residents in the country until now, because we used a digital space through academic life and emergency medicine to create a virtual community of practice, a term I'm going to come back to numerous times in this lecture, a group of people with shared interests and shared learning needs. And we created the Chief Resident Incubator. This was the team of faculty who worked on the project, including Dr. Lin. I was working at Northwestern University at the time, some folks from Harvard and some folks from Stanford. And this is a screenshot from our website, and we enrolled chief residents over the course of the academic year 2015 and 2016 to participate in what was the first incubator. And the incubator is a business term in the United States. I don't know if it translates in Brazil, but it tends to be a mentorship model for 20 and 30-year-olds who often have startup companies. And there's a lot of incubators all around me in Silicon Valley, in this part of the San Francisco Bay Area, where folks are starting digital tech companies and they need mentorship from folks who have been successful in business. So venture capitalists will mentor groups of CEOs from small tech startups, and they'll intensely mentor them for 8 to 12 months with the hope that they're going to be able to have great success in their businesses. And often these venture capitalists will invest in the very best ones to make sure that they are successful. We took that concept and we applied it to medical education. We said, let's take all of the chief residents in the United States, put them in this digital community of practice, and then greatly invest our time and resources in them to make them the very best faculty members they could be when they move from chief resident to faculty in the next year. That was our hope and our intention for the program. So just to show a few screenshots from our annual report from that year, we ended up enrolling chief residents from all over the United States. Over 200 of them participated. And we created our community using the digital platform Slack. Slack is a wonderful communications platform where you can group and text message one another, but also archive files. And we use this as sort of a digital learning platform where all of the chief residents were behind this closed platform, so other folks couldn't access their educational content. We had access for all of our faculty members, and we provided them a host of different topics across a 12-month curriculum. Each month was a different topic germane to academic medicine: how to be a great educator, how to be a great researcher, how to run the business portion of an emergency department so that you can understand where the money flows, how to hire people, how to be a faculty member at an academic institution in the United States, which has its own crazy requirements. This was our curriculum, and we deployed it by putting lots of files up online, having discussion channels within this platform Slack, and then having faculty members from all over the world connecting with our learners through Google Hangout on Air. So we would use Google Hangout. You can see these faculty members from various institutions broadcasting themselves, much like I'm doing right now, with groups of chief residents here at the bottom. I'm assuming my pointer is working the way it's working on my screen. And each of these experts would talk about a different topic each month in coordination with our curriculum. We had some really big hitters, such as the former Surgeon General of the United States, sort of the biggest doctor, who's appointed by the president, who sat down with our chief residents, which is just mind-blowing for me. I couldn't believe I got to sit and chat with a U.S. Surgeon General and just sort of hear his wisdom about leadership and how to be successful in healthcare. These were opportunities simply unheard of and unimagined before we created this platform. We did have some in-person events where at national meetings, our chief residents who were in attendance would come together for a happy hour. And I do think that's really important for any community of practice, even virtual or digital ones. If you enter the Twitter sphere in order to become a learner or a teacher, you're going to start making connections with other educators or other students online. And after a while, you'll feel like you know them, right? It's almost like writing letters to your pen pal when you're a child. And then you go to meetings and you're like, wow, I've known you through this digital space for years. It's so great to finally meet. Well, we created those meeting spaces for our chief residents so that they could get to know one another and trust one another. And that trust became very important to learning in this digital space, to making a safe and healthy learning environment where the learners and the faculty could trust one another. We had some grant competition, so our chief residents could get the opportunity to do some funded research. We had companies donate money to be able to fund these grants, and we would have specific calls. The one on your screen right now is an example of a wellness grant that we wanted the chief residents to study different ways to prevent physician burnout. Different courses around the country would offer the opportunity for our chief residents to visit and be a digital fellow on site for their conference and learn how to create an educational conference. We had a lot of opportunities for them to publish, particularly online on the Allium blog, since we were the ones sponsoring it. And not to let this get buried on your screen, you'll see the first publication at the very beginning of our first year of the Chief Resident Incubator was one in which I challenged 10 chief residents to write a short blog entitled Dear Residents, 10 Things Your Chief Residents Want You to Know. This was the first opportunity they had at the beginning of their chief year to say something important to their learners, and they put it together as a single blog post. Within 7 days, it was viewed 6,000 times. Now, these chief residents had not had any opportunity generally to publish leading up to their chief year, and to be able to publish something that was read by 6,000 learners in 1 week and eventually translated to Spanish has been viewed online tens of thousands of times. This was huge access for a very junior trainee to be able to get, and really something that we could only do because we use social media to drive that impact. And then we gave away a bunch of books and sent them things in the mail to kind of supplement the course. So I'm going to transition from just describing that curriculum to describing both the curriculum design methodology and the learning theories that underpin that curriculum. And first, just talk about curriculum design. If any of you are ever in charge of making a curriculum for a group of learners, this is the Bible in curriculum design. This is Kern's Curriculum Development for Medical Education. I highly, highly recommend it. Any medical educator who does curriculum design in the United States generally has read this book and follows the 6 steps outlined in the 6 main chapters of this book. There's a chapter for each of these steps. And I think it's worth just pausing for a second and talking about them. And then we'll talk about where social media comes in as a tool. But for any curriculum, so if you have to teach any group of learners anything over the course of a period of time, you need to follow these 6 steps. The first is to identify the problem that you're trying to fix. The next is to target a needs assessment to try to figure out how that problem fits within the context of your learners. So I'll use an example. If you are a cardiologist who's an expert in arrhythmia, and you have to teach students how to read EKGs versus cardiology fellows who've been in training for 8 or 9 years how to read, very nuanced differences in EKGs with respect to the arrhythmia that you study, you're going to create very different curricula, right? So the context that we teach matters greatly. So the second step is always to understand who your learners are and what they really need. Then you design in step 3 their goals and objectives. In step 4, you go to your toolbox and you pick the appropriate tool. And that's where social media can be perhaps the way that you choose to teach. Sometimes you may teach in a very traditional didactic lecture hall like the one that you're in right now. Sometimes you'll teach in small groups. But I would encourage you to try to use social media as a way to teach your students in the future. Go to that toolbox, pick an app that you haven't tried before, and see if it might have any benefit. Implementation is step 5. It's where you actually do the teaching. And then step 6 is where you evaluate your program, you get feedback from your learners, and then you cycle through the following year. So if we're going to apply Kern's 6 steps for curriculum design to the example that I gave you, our problem that we identified was that chief residents need leadership skill development. They lacked accessible training programs around the country. Often chief residents would be sent to a one-day conference, and that wasn't enough to meet all of their learning needs. We felt like they needed a 12-month longitudinal curriculum that covered lots and lots of different pertinent topics. The other part of our needs assessment was that there was no community of chief residents. Chief residents, as I said, were very isolated at their individual programs, and they had no access to one another around the country. So we wanted to create that community of practice. Our objectives reflected the 12 months of topics I talked about, research and teaching, administrative topics. Our educational strategy were the social media tools themselves. And in this case, we used the platform Slack for discussion, Google Hangout on Air for the teachers to be able to be video broadcast to our learners, and then in-person meetings. Our implementation was as I described, and our program evaluation was renewals. So chief residents enrolled in our program, they paid tuition to be part of the Chief Resident Incubator, which was a small amount of money, $200 US for a full year of participation, which was enough to keep the lights on, essentially. And if they had the chief residents in their program participate the following year, if their institutions thought it was worthwhile, that's how we knew that we were hitting the mark. And our numbers have grown each year as people realize what we're doing. And we've expanded to have incubators for fellowships and incubators for faculty members as well. The faculty member one being extremely popular, and we limit the number of people who can be in it each year, very competitive to get in. So if you'd like to learn more about the Chief Resident Incubator, we published a paper about the curriculum design, and in it we go into a deep dive into the learning theory. So I'll sort of pause there and let you read more about it on your own if you'd like, and then transition to the second objective. So if my first objective really was to just tell you that social media is a tool and you use tools to fix problems, the second objective is to tell you why I think that's valid. And learning theory is the validation of any educational intervention or curriculum, and that's what Daniel asked me to speak about today. So I think there are three main theories that underpin social media, and we're going to go just through each of the three in turn. And I hope because I've given you the example first, the theories will make more sense. So the first is constructivism. Constructivism is a philosophic term where it argues that humans come together, and because they've come together in whatever form or fashion, be it a tribe in the jungle when we were not sort of in our enlightened age, all the way to where you're currently sitting in a room together as a group of students or a group of doctors or a group of faculty. However we come together, that context drives our knowledge and our meaning. So right now you're learning about social media and how it could be a tool in medical education. If you weren't in medicine, it would make very little sense. And you certainly would have very little, you'd find very little meaning in what I'm talking about. Piaget took constructivism and made it a learning theory. He said essentially the social context of humans coming together drives their experiential learning. And because of that, we're able to recognize groups of learners and address their specific learning needs. So that's constructivism and constructivist learning theory. And from that comes this concept of community of practice. It's a term that was conceptualized by the authors of the book Situated Learning. And in that book, they describe that learning occurs when individuals share common goals and interests. So it's more than just being located together or assigned to a room together to listen to a lecture by this guy from the United States. But more importantly, it's when you share a common interest or you share a common goal that learning can occur. And in this case of our chief residents, they shared a common interest for 1 year of their life. Before becoming chief residents, they weren't chief residents, right? So there was no meaning or context for the material that we taught them for the 12 months that they were chiefs. After they finished being chief residents, they'd moved on to be faculty members. And again, there was no meaning or context for the material that we were teaching. It was irrelevant to them. But for the period of time, those 12 months that they were chief residents, it was highly social and highly relevant to the particular role and the particular station in life that they were in. They were their own community of practice. They had their own common goals and interests that were time limited, and we taught them during that very important 12-month period of their life. So that's the idea of community of practice. It builds off constructivist learning theory. And the last theory that I think is relevant is social development theory. This framework argues that social interaction has to occur before learning can occur. So in the case of our chief residents, we brought them together on a social platform, again, Slack, and we gave them assignments, we gave them introductions, we sent them books and materials, and we got them engaging with one another before we began teaching them. And once they were socialized, once they had a set of social behaviors and social norms given to them within the context of this digital platform, within Slack, and that social norms could be just a list of how to behave nicely online. I mean, that was really about it. Once they had the architecture for how to behave together, they were able to learn together. It was the pre-work that had to go into creating this safe and healthy learning space so that they would share and be vulnerable and learn as a group. So that's social development theory. Again, an extension of constructivism and a little bit different than community of practice. So these are the three main learning theories that underpin any social media application being used for teaching and learning. So I'd like to take those and just extend it to the concept of Twitter, right? I ask this provocative question all the time. I'm about to teach a course next year at Stanford entitled, Does Social Media Make Better Doctors? It's going to be an undergraduate course. And the argument is that social media allows physicians and medical students, those learning medicine, to come together as a specific community online in ways that they've never been able to come together before. And I'll tell you from my own experience, I'm a believer that this made me a better doctor. I've been on Twitter since 2014. This was a screenshot of my Twitter account the other day. You know, I follow about 800 people. I scroll through what people post every day. There's a lot of nonsense. There's a lot of pop culture and politics and et cetera. But if I scroll through and I try to find medicine, you know, many of those people that I follow are physician educators or researchers in the United States and the UK and Australia who are posting about an interesting article that they read or a course they just taught or something they just taught their students in the clinical unit. And, you know, oftentimes it's tagged with something online or a journal article that I can read more about. And I'll say 2 or 3 times a day, I probably go as a learner to this space just to read an article that I think one of my friends found interesting. And that makes me a better doctor. People are curating the medical literature for me so that I don't have to do it myself. And then I, in return, because this is a two-way street, it's social, right? Socialization requires you to give as much as you receive. I do the same thing every day. If you follow me online, you'll find a bunch of teaching pearls sprinkled in through the week. This morning I posted that blog post that I talked about for international clinician educators. So I really believe that I've grown into a social network. I follow your own Daniel Schubert online and Rob Rogers, who you spoke with earlier, and I learn things from everybody that I follow online. And I certainly wouldn't be with you speaking today if there wasn't a social connection between Daniel and Rob and many of the other folks that have led to the group of us that go around the world teaching medical education. This socialization came specifically because I went to a lecture entitled From Twitter to Tenure, and I decided to download an app and begin participating. I entered the community and I gave a little bit of myself and I put myself out there. If you've never used Twitter before, here are some basic rules about Twitter. Download it to your phone. That's pretty easy. Put a headshot. We want to see what you look like. Write a description of who you are. I am a medical student at this Rio de Janeiro State University Medical School. That's where I'm speaking, right? Search for the blog post, Mom, this is how Twitter works. It's great. If you don't know how Twitter works, read that blog post. If there's some old faculty member in the back of the room who thinks this is silly, print that blog post out and give it to him or her so that they can download Twitter and use it themselves. Write a tweet, and then I urge you to follow 10 physicians. And Daniel can give you 10 people. You could follow me and then just see who I follow and follow 9 more people and just watch what they write for 2 weeks. Don't participate at all other than to watch and see if you learn something. Do this experiment. If in 2 weeks you learn something about medicine, then I would urge you to put something into the community and speak yourself. Share with those that you're following something that you think is interesting, and then repeat the experiment for another 2 weeks. And my guess is you'll be hooked. You'll start reading articles and finding people who share your interests in surgery or pediatrics or toxicology, and you'll find your community and you'll start learning from that community. Some other important things: post clinical pearls in your thoughts about research, application, and integration, not facts necessarily, but how you use those facts. And then never ever post about a patient. Never take a picture of a patient. Never take a picture of their X-ray or their EKG. Just don't do it. I think it's an invasion of their privacy. We can certainly teach one another without actually showing the patient that we just cared for. I think that's really wrong. If you are looking for emergency physicians to follow, there was actually a journal publication in the Annals of Emergency Medicine a couple of years ago that described who the most influential emergency physicians are online. And this gives you 100 people to follow. And this was in English-speaking countries, so all around the world. It wasn't just the United States. And there's a large number of these folks are from the UK and Australia. And I would argue you could pick any 10 of those to do the experiment that I challenged. So what's next? Where is social media going in medical education and healthcare? I think the space is really enlarging, and it's going to be beyond just using Twitter. Mayo Clinic, which is the #1 ranked hospital in the United States, really has embraced social media deeply. If you don't know, the Mayo Clinic has sites in a rural part of Minnesota, which is where the main hospital sits, in Arizona and in Florida. The Arizona and Florida hospitals are relatively new, like in the last 20 years, but the main Mayo Hospital is in Rochester, Minnesota. It is nowhere that any of you should ever visit. It is just in the middle of nowhere, but it is a big referral hospital, and it's the #1 hospital in the country for a reason. People come from all over the country to get a second opinion when they have a rare or unusual disease. For their physicians to have an international presence so that those referrals can happen, those physicians need to be experts at getting their brand out and getting their name out. So they've gone so far as to certify staff members at Mayo, and they have a certification course. If you want to come be certified in the use of social media in health education, they have an entire set of courses that you can go and take. They now require social media presence to be promoted. So if you're going to go from junior faculty to senior faculty, you need to show that you have social media scholarships. You need to be blogging and putting online podcasts and things to be able to get your name out in order to go up. It's not just traditional journal publishing anymore at the Mayo Clinic, and I suspect many of the big institutions like my own around the country will begin to follow Mayo's lead. The University of Pennsylvania, another top medical school in the U.S., now has a Center for Social Media and Health Innovation. They follow their patients in the community to see what they're tweeting about and what they're posting online on Facebook, and then they try to figure out if they can affect the health of that community by teaching them as health educators, or by trying to figure out what health problem is occurring in the community, and they studied. It's really cutting edge stuff, and very, very interesting. So what, if anything, did I teach you? I'm not sure I taught you anything, but let's see if I did. I think you can be a better educator if you use social media as a leader. What is the thing that you're passionate about teaching? What problem do you see that needs to get fixed? I gave you one example. This lecture goes on and on and on with I have lots of problems, and I use social media to solve a lot of them. I think you have to choose the right tool from the toolbox. That's the methodologic selection of which app or platform you're going to use as an educator. And then if you're going to read up on any of the theories out there, I think these 3 theories I described underpin and validate the use of social media as a tool. I recommend reading just a review article about each, and you'll really understand how to best strategize and navigate this space. If you'd like to hear a little bit more about different problems that I've solved online, there is a podcast from Northwestern Digital Learning that I go into great depth about several other problems and sort of how social media has solved them. If you'd like copies of these slides, I posted them for free online on slideshare.net, and you can search my name to get a copy of those slides. Is someone taking a selfie or a picture of the screen? I can't tell there. Maybe he was taking a selfie. And I thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you. This is a really unique opportunity and truly an honor. So thanks, Daniel. Thanks to all of you.